All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about an application of integration or area under the curve called consumer and producer surplus. And it's a pretty easily understood topic. It's a lot of conceptual stuff, and there's some integration right at the end. So basically, if you think about something that you really like, and so in this example, we're going to use pizza. And let's say that a local company or local store that you buy from, you're willing to pay 12 bucks for their medium pizza. However, they only charge $8 for that. So in a sense, you can say that you saved $4 on that pizza because what you were willing to pay was $12, but the market price of that pizza was only $8. Now, it's not like it was ever actually $12 and you had a coupon, and so you physically saved $4 this time. It's sort of like, hey, I feel like I'm getting a deal because I'm paying less than what I would actually be willing to pay. So the difference between the price that you're willing to pay and the price that you actually pay is called a surplus. So I was willing to pay more than I'm being asked to pay. If you add up all of those, different scenarios, so like say you have a friend who was willing to pay $11, so they technically saved $3. You had another friend who was willing to pay $8.25, so they kind of technically saved 25 cents. So if you add up all those like theoretical savings, you get what's called consumer surplus. Okay, so that's a total savings between what consumers are willing to spend and what they actually are asked to spend. So when we talk about consumer surplus, the first thing we need to talk about is demand. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw a demand curve. And we're going to write demand for now as D of X. And the demand curve in economics slopes downward. And that's because price and quantity demanded. You don't want to just say quantity, you want to say quantity demanded because price and quantity supplied have a different relationship. So if you're talking about price and demand, you want to say quantity demanded. So price and quantity demanded have an inverse relationship. And as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and vice versa. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And that's why we end up having a negative slope. And so our demand curve will go down. If you take an economics class in high school or you take an entry-level economics class in college, they might draw demand as a line. It's more like a curve. So we kind of draw it like a curve in our book. Okay, so that's a demand curve. On the y-axis, we have price, and on the x-axis, we have quantity demanded. And so that's a demand curve right there. Okay. We could draw this demand curve any way we want. So for example, if we want to give it a different shape, we could kind of draw it like this. It's kind of just like an idea of a curve. Like we don't actually have to draw anything that's a real function right now because that's really not what we're doing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. So the market, since we have what's called a capitalistic society, what happens is we have a free market. So what we do is we kind of let prices set themselves. And we have buyers willing to buy at certain prices, and we have sellers willing to sell at certain prices. And what that ends up creating is what's called a market price. And so there will be some kind of market price. And what that means is it's a price set by the free market. So let's just go ahead and put a market price on right here, okay? So I'm just arbitrarily putting a price on here, and this is the price that you're being asked to spend on the product, okay? And so we'll call this B, I guess. That's what our book calls it. So this is our market price, and so this is the price that's being charged. So we'll call it the actual price. So if you go into a store and you go to buy the pizza, this is the actual price that they're going to charge you, okay? At that price, there is some kind of quantity that's going to be demanded, okay? So A is the number of goods demanded at this price, okay? So the market set a price, B, and at that price, if we go over to our demand curve, let me write demand on here. If we go over to our demand curve, we'll call it D of X, then if we plug in the price, B, we get A goods that they're asking us that we're going to be demanding, right? So at this price, this is what we demand, all right? So if you take a look at this, all along here, people or consumers, they were willing to pay these prices all along, but they're only asked to pay this price. But they were willing to pay whatever these prices are, right? And even under here, they were willing to pay these prices. There were consumers willing to pay that price. There were consumers willing to pay that price. Okay, so we can do this kind of forever and make it look like we have chicken pox. But the idea is this area above the market price, but below the demand curve, is consumer surplus, because I was willing to pay this whole time. There were consumers willing to pay this higher price. So the area above the market price, okay, so I'm going to write this out for you. So consumer surplus is equal to the area above the market price which we're calling B, but below the demand curve. So I was willing, or all these consumers were willing to pay more money than the market price. So this is called consumer surplus. That's consumer surplus. And the formula for that, because we want to add up all these individual amounts, it's the area under the curve. So if we go from, this is 0, and then the next x value is A. So we would integrate from 0 to A of, the upper function is the demand curve, right? So the upper function is the demand curve, so D of X, minus, and the lower function down here, that's a straight line at B. So that would be the line y equals B, so it would be minus B. And we're integrating with respect to X. So if you want to kind of just memorize it, this is the demand curve, and this is the market price. Okay? So this is kind of the formula you want to memorize for consumer surplus. You don't necessarily have to memorize it if you can draw it out real fast. It should really make sense. The upper curve is the demand curve, and the lower curve is the horizontal line, y equals B. Okay? And you integrate from 0 to the quantity demanded, so 0 to A. So you're finding the area under the curve. So let's go ahead and try an example here. So it says, if the demand for electricity is D of X equals 1100 minus 10X. If you were to graph that, that's a line that downward slopes, where X is millions of kilowatt hours. So the demand for electricity is in kilowatt hours, right? And it says, find the consumer surplus at the demand level, X equals 80. So the first thing we need to do is, they didn't give us a market price. So we need to figure out what the market price is. Well, the market price is going to be the demand curve evaluated at 80. So if X equals 80, okay, kilowatt hours, what is the market price? So how much are consumers willing to pay? Right? So we would do D of 80. So I'm plugging in 80 kilowatt hours because it says X is in millions of kilowatt hours. So when when X is 80, what are we willing to pay for that? Okay. So if I plug in 80 here, I get 1100 minus 80 times 10 is 800. So we get 300. So that is the market price. Okay. So if we draw this real fast, we'll get our X and Y axis here. And here's the graph. We would start up at 1100 and we would go down, right? So it's just a negative sloped line. That's just that, okay? And then what we're saying is, so this is my demand curve. And then we have a market price of 300. So we would throw 300 on here somewhere, okay? And you don't have to be perfect with this. We go over to the line. This area under here is my consumer surplus, okay? And this output right here, we said X equals 80, so this would be 80. So now if we integrate, it would be the integral from 0 to 80. The upper curve is 1100 minus 10x. And the lower curve, right, the lower curve of this area, so upper, lower. The lower is the 300. And then dx. So if we simplify that, we get, negative 10x plus 800 dx. And we're integrating from 0 to 80. So this integral would just simply be negative 10x squared over 2 plus 800x. And we're going to evaluate from 0 to 80. So I'm going to simplify this a little bit. I'm going to come over here. So this would be negative 5x squared plus 800x. And we're going to evaluate from 0 to 80. So that's going to be negative 5 times 80 squared plus 800 times 80. And then plugging in 0 is just going to give us zeros everywhere. But I'll write it out just so that you understand what's happening. So we'll end that there. Yep, I think I got it right. And then if you multiply that all out, you end up getting $32,000. So what that means is at a price of $80, consumer surplus is $32,000. Okay, so that's the consumer surplus right there. So at that, instant or at this actual scenario, consumer surplus is $32,000. Okay. Now, there's the other side of this coin, which is called producer surplus. And producer surplus is the exact same thing as consumer surplus, only for producers. So producer surplus actually measures the benefit for producers when they are able to sell above the market price. Okay, so for example, sell at the market price, but the market price is higher than what they actually cared to get. Okay, so let's say eBay is a good example, right? I put something up on eBay and I'm like, I want to get 25 bucks for this. And all of a sudden there's people like fighting for it, right? This is probably like my autograph, right? So I signed a math book and I was like, oh, I hope I get 25 bucks for this. But like all my old students come out of the woodwork and start bidding like crazy on it, right? And all of a sudden I make 50 bucks on it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's awesome. I made a surplus of $25. So when producers are willing to sell something for say $5, but they end up getting $8 for it, they now have a surplus of $3, okay? So it's the same thing. It's just this is going to be, hey, I'm selling at the market price, but I was willing to take less, okay? So producers will benefit when they were willing to take less, but the market price was above what they wanted. In consumer surplus, the market price was below. So let's go back up. The market price, if you look, is lower than what I was willing to spend, right? I was willing to spend all of this, but I only had to pay this amount. Now, in this case, it's going to be the opposite. I was willing to take a lower amount, but consumers are willing to pay me more. So here's price and here's quantity, and we're going to look at so the supply curve. Now, the supply curve is going to be upward sloping because as price increases, quantity supplied is going to increase. Because if I'm going to make more money on it, I'm going to start churning out whatever I'm trying to sell. If the price decreases, it might not be worth it for me to produce as much as I was at a higher price. So the supply curve has a positive slope. So we're going to go positive slope on the supply curve. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a supply curve. If nobody's paying me anything, I'm not, outputting anything. So we usually go down here to 0 and draw a upward sloping supply curve. So that's supply. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll throw a market price on here. So if we throw a market price on, so here's our market price. This is the price that consumers are willing to pay and producers are willing to sell at. So this is my market price. And remember, we called that B because there's a lot of B's in the words market and price. Okay. So this is the price that I'm going to get. But look, I'm willing to sell at any of these prices. So this is all surplus because I was willing to take less for whatever I'm selling, but consumers are willing to pay me more. So let's go, right? Let's make up this difference. So all this shaded area is called producer surplus. Now, if we come down, this is the quantity supplied at the market price. So this is the quantity. I'll put Q, we'll put Q B. So this is the quantity at the market price. Okay. And if the QB confuses you, I'll just get rid of it. So this is the quantity I'm going to supply at the market price. Okay. So here's producer surplus. So producer surplus, we're going to integrate again from 0 all the way over to here. And I think actually we called that A in our last example. We called it B and A. So I'll do it again. So we'll call that A. So we're going to integrate from 0 to A, right? Lower bound, upper bound. And we're going to do the upper curve minus the lower. Well, in this situation, the upper curve is actually the market price. So this time it's going to be B minus the lower curve is the supply curve. So upper minus lower gives us this, and then dx. Okay, so that's producer surplus. So the difference is in consumer surplus, the price, here it is. In consumer surplus, it was demand minus price. So D minus P, that's alphabetical order. So the demand curve minus the market price. And then in producer surplus, the price is on top. And then the supply curve's on the bottom. Okay, so let's go ahead and do an example. It says for the supply function, S of X equals 0.09 X squared dollars, and the demand level is X equals 200, find the producer surplus. So we can kind of think about this. Now, this is a parabola. It doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of drawing it so you have some idea of what's going on. If you want to just memorize the formulas, you don't have to draw this out. But if I have a parabola that's upward sloping, okay, so this is S of X, and then this is price, and this is quantity. Let's see, the demand is 200, right? So they are demanding 200 items. That's not a price, right? So X equals 200. So I'm going to put 200 on here. So here's 200. So what I need to do is I need to figure out what the market price is. This is exactly what we did last time. So at X equals 200, what is the market price? So what are people willing to pay? So if I do S of 200, I get 0.09 times 200 squared, which is 3,600. Okay, so this is 3,600 right here. And now we want to find the area under this curve right here. So the area between the market price and the supply curve, because I was willing to take all these lower amounts of money, right? I was willing to take all of this lower amount of money, but the whole time I got $3,600 for everything I sold, but I was willing to take way less, okay? So my producer surplus is going to be equal to the integral from 0 to 200, because those are the x values, of the upper curve, which is 3,600, minus the lower curve, which is the parabola, dx. Okay, so if I integrate, you add 1 to the exponent and divide by the new exponent. So 3,600x minus 0.09x cubed divided by 3, and we're going to evaluate that from 0 to 200. Okay, on a pit test, they probably wouldn't ask you to do this without a calculator. They probably make the numbers work out a little bit better, but you can simplify right there a little bit to help. And we're going to evaluate it from 0 to 200. So again, the 0 is going to give us 0, but I'll write it out. So this is 3,600 times 200 minus 0.03 times 200 cubed. That's cute. Minus 3,600 times 0 minus 0.03 times 0 cubed. And work all that out, and you end up getting $480,000. So the producers made $480,000 more than they thought they were going to make. So that is consumer and producer surplus. So I'm going to write the formulas down again for, actually, you know what? I'll do it on the next one. So I will put a problem together and then we can go ahead and check it out. So I'm going to put consumer surplus and producer surplus together on the same graph. Okay. So first off, I'm going to start with a demand curve. So D of X. We're going to call that demand. Okay. So here is the demand curve, downward sloping. D down, downward sloping demand. Okay. And then we're going to have an upward sloping supply curve. So this is supply. Okay. So again, I'm not supplying anything if you're not giving me any money. So I'm going to start down here at 0, 0. Okay. So this is my supply curve. And then remember, we have price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. Now, the point at which supply and demand are equal. This is a important name. So when demand equals supply, okay, that's called the equilibrium. And you have an equilibrium price called the market price. So here's the market price. And you have an equilibrium quantity. So this is the quantity that is demanded. So, and supplied, right? So it's supply and demand at that point. So this is, we'll call it the market quantity, supplied and demanded. So this is my market price, and this is my market quantity, demanded and supplied. So in a free market, what happens is if you have a price too high, consumers will demand less, and that'll shift the price down normally, right? So when supply equals demand, or vice versa, it doesn't matter, you have what's called equilibrium. Everything is happy, nothing's changing, everything's chill, everyone's happy. Producers are happy, consumers are happy, and we're good to go. All right, so now if you look at this picture, at equilibrium, we still have, let me change colors here, we still have producer and consumer surplus, because here is the demand curve, okay, and here is what they were willing to, this is what they're being asked to pay. So the market price for consumers is the price they have to pay. Okay, well, I have to pay this. I would have paid any of this, right? So I would have paid a whole heck of a lot more this whole time, right? So this pink area, this is consumer surplus. So the area between the demand curve and the market price. So consumer surplus is the area under demand but above market price. So this is, I was willing to pay all of this. I only had to pay the market price. So this is my consumer surplus. Now, on the flip side, we have producer surplus. And producer surplus is, I would have sold whatever I was selling for any of these prices down here. Any of these, right? I would have taken less. But you were giving me the market price the whole time. So I was making more this entire time, right? I was making that. So when I was making more money and would have taken less, that's called producer surplus. So producer surplus is the area under the market price, but above the supply curve. Okay, so they're flipped around a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write two integrals for you. And if you're just the type that just likes to memorize and doesn't really want to understand every single step, you can do that. That was just about to erase everything on the entire planet. So let me actually just take a minute here and do this. It's going to take a second. So get yourself some popcorn or something. Snapchat, whatever you need to do. Okay, so I'm going to write these out here, and like I said, if you're having trouble really conceptualizing everything and you're more of a memorizer, here it is. So consumer surplus is above producer surplus. So producer surplus is on the bottom. Easiest way to remember that, C is above P in alphabetical order, and here's how it goes. Consumer surplus is equal to the integral from 0 to A, which this we can call A. That's what we did on the last thing, and we called this B, okay? So you integrate along the x-axis from 0 to A of, the demand curve is going to be on top, and the market price is going to be on the bottom. Producer surplus, it integrates from 0 to A, but producer surplus, you can see the price is on top. So it's B minus the supply curve, dx. Okay, so if you kind of just want to memorize, consumer surplus is above, producer surplus is below. Consumer surplus goes demand minus price. Because I was willing to pay more, I didn't have to pay as much. Producer surplus is price minus supply, because I was willing to pay more than I actually had to. Okay, so just memorize those. I was checking to see if there was anything else I needed to say. But just memorize those and make sure that you can do the practice problems and you can set everything up just like I did.